enjoy the third part of James and the Giant Peach, written by Roald Dahl, and from me, for you read in ASMR style now. ASMR Katz. This is now the third part of James and the Giant Peach, written by Roald Dahl and from me, interpreted in ASMR style. My name is ASMR Katz, and I am happy to show you the satisfaction of sound. If you not already have seen the first two parts, then please check them out. Because I am now already almost at the end of the book, and this one is a really good one, so I just can recommend you to click yourself through my playlist to find the other parts you have to listen to before, when you want then to hear this video clip. I would be honored if you can write a comment, follow, subscribe, and click on the notification bell to support this channel and actually get all the latest updates. So let us start. Here I put my headphones in because this is a high quality recording. I check my two cameras, if everything is rolling. And then I start with the third part. 26. The centipede, who had begun dancing wildly around the deck during this song, had suddenly gone too close to the downward curving edge of the peach, and for 3 awful seconds he had stood teetering on the brink, swinging his leg frantically in circles in effort to stop himself from falling over backward into the space. But before anyone could reach him, down he went. He gave a shriek of terror as he fell down, and the others, rushing to the side and peering over, saw the poor long tumbling over and over through the air, getting smaller and smaller, until he was out of sight. "Silkworm," yelled James. "Quick, start spinning." The silkworm sighed, for she was still very tired from spinning all that silk for the birds, but she did as she was told. "I'm going down after him," cried James, grabbing the silk string as it started coming out of the silkworm and tying the end of it around his waist. "The rest of you hold on, Silkworm, so I don't pull her over with me. And later on, if you feel the tugs and the string start hauling me up again." He jumped and he went tumbling down after the centipede, down and down towards the sea below, and you can imagine how quickly the silkworm had spun to keep it up the speed of his fall. "We never the either of them," cried the ladybird. "Oh dear, just when we all read so happy too." Miss Spider, the glowworm, and the ladybird all began to cry. So did the earthworm. "I don't care a bit about the centipede," the earthworm said, "but I really did love the little boy." Very softly, the grasshopper started to play the funeral march on his violin, and by the time he had finished, everyone, including himself, was in a flood of tears. Suddenly, there came 3 sharp taps on the rope. "Pull," shouted the grasshopper. "Everyone get behind me and pull." There was about a mile of string to be hauled in, but they all worked like mad, and in the end, over the side of the peach, there appeared a dripping wet James with a dripping wet centipede clinging to him tightly with all 42 of his legs. "He saved me," gasped the centipede. "He swam around the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to find me." "My dear boy," the grasshopper said, "I don't congratulate you. "My boots," cried the Centipede. "Just look at my precious boots. They are ruined by the water." "Be quiet," the Earthworm said. You're lucky to be alive." "Are we still going up?" asked James. "We certainly are," answered the Grasshopper, "and it's beginning to get dark." "I know, it will be soon to be night." "Why don't we all go down below and keep warm until tomorrow morning?" Miss Spider suggested. "No," the Grasshopper said. "I think that would be very unwise. It will be safer if we all stay up here through the night and keep watch. Then, if anything happens, we shall anyway be ready for it." 27. James and his companions crouched closer together on top of the peach as the night began closing around them. Cloud-like mountains stood high above their heads on all sides, mysterious, overwhelming. Gradually, it grew darker and darker, and then a pale three-quarter moon came up over the tops of the clouds and cast an eerie light on the whole scene. The giant peach swayed gently from side to side as it floated along, and the hundreds of silky white strings going upward from its time were beautiful in the moonlight. So also was the great flock of birds overhead. There was not a sound anywhere. Traveling upon the peach was not at least like traveling in an airplane. The airplane comes clattering on, roaring through the sky, and whatever might be, looking secretly up there in a great cloud mountains, goes running for cover at its approach. That is why people who travel in airplanes never see anything. But the peach was soft, still, and travel making no noise at all as it floated along. And several times during that long silent night ride high up over the middle of the ocean in the moonlight, James and his friends saw things that no one had ever seen before. Once, as they drifted slightly past a massive white cloud, they saw on top of it a group of strange, tall, wispy-looking things that were about twice the height of an ordinary man. They are not easy to see, first because they were almost as white as the clouds itself. But as the peach sailed closer, it became obvious that these things were actually living creatures, tall, wispy, light-like, shadowy white creatures who looked as thought they were made out of mixture of cotton wool and candy floss and thin white hairs. "Oh," the ladybird said, "I don't like this at all." "Shh," James whispered back. "Don't let them hear you. They must be cloudmen." "Cloudmen?" they murmured, huddling closer together. "Oh dear, I'm glad I'm blind and can see them," the Earthworm said, "or I would properly scream." "I hope they don't turn around and see us," Miss Spider stammered. "Do you think they would eat us?" the Earthworm asked. "They would eat you," the Centipede answered, grinning. "They would cut you up like a salami and eat you in slices." The poor Earthworm began quicker all over with fright. "But what are they going to do?" the Grasshopper whispered. "I don't know," James answered. "Let's watch and see." The cloudmen were all standing in a group, and they were doing something peculiar with their hands. First, they would reach out, all of them at once, and grab handful of clouds. Then they would roll this handful of cloud in their fingers until they turned into what looked like large white marbles. Then they more bites of cloud and start over again. It was all very silent and mysterious, but the pile of marbles beside them kept growing larger and larger. Soon there were a truckload of there at least. "They must be absolutely mad," the centipede said. "There's nothing to be afraid of here." "But be quiet, you pest," the Earthworm whispered. "We shall all be eaten if they see us." But the Cloudmen were much too busy with what they were doing to have noticed the great peach floating silent up behind them. Then the watchers on the peach saw one of the Cloudmen raising his long wispy arms above his head and heard him shouting, "All right, boys, that's enough. Get the shovels," and all the other Cloudmen immediately let out a strange high-pitched whoop of joy and started jumping up and down and waving their arms in the air. Then they picked up enormous shovels and rushed over to the pile of marbles and began shoveling them fast as they could over the side of Cloud in the space. "Down they go," they chanted as they worked. "Down they go, hail and snow, freezes and sneezes and noses will blow." "It's hailstone," whispered James excitedly. "They be making hailstones, and now they are showering them down on the people in the world below." "Hailstones," the centipede said. "That's ridiculous. This is summertime. You don't have hailstones in summertime. They are practicing for the winter." "I don't believe it," shouted the centipede. "Shh," the others whispered, and James said softly, "For heaven's sake, centipede, don't make such a noise." The centipede roared with laughter. "Those impickles couldn't hear anything," he cried. "They are deaf as doorknobs. You watch." And before anyone could stop him, he had cupped his front feet to his mouth and was yelling to the Cloudmen as loud as he could. "Idiots," he yelled. "What on earth do you think you're doing over there?" The effect was immediately. The Cloudmen jumped around as if they had been stung by wasps, and when they saw the great golden peach floating past them, not 50 yards away in the sky, they gave a yell of surprise and dropped their shovels to the ground. And there they stood with the moonlight streaming down all over them, absolutely motionless, like a group of tall, white, hairy statues staring and staring at the giant fruit as it went sailing by. The passengers on the peach sat frozen with terror, looking back at the Cloudmen and wondering what was going to happen next. "Now you are done it, you loathsome pest," whispered the Earthworm to the centipede. "I'm not frightened of them," shouted the centipede, and to show everybody once again that he wasn't, he stood up at his full height and started dancing about and making insulting signs at the Cloudmen. This evidently infuriated the Cloudmen beyond belief. All at once they spun around and grabbed a great handful of hailstones and rushed to the edge of the cloud and started throwing them at the peach, striking with fury all the time. "Look out," cried James. "Quick, lie down, lie flat, all on deck." It was luck they did. A large hailstone can hurt you as much as a rock of a lump of a lead if it's thrown hard enough. And my goodness, how those Cloudmen could throw. The hailstone came whizzing through the air like bullets from a machine gun, and James could hear them smashing against the side of the peach and burying themselves in the peach flesh with horrible noises. Plop, plop, ping, as they pounced off the poor ladybird's shell because she couldn't lie as flat as the others, and then crack, as one of them hit the centipede right on the nose, again as another one hit somewhere else. "Oh," he cried, "oh, stop." But the Cloudmen had no intention of stopping. James could see them rushing about and get cloud like a lot of huggy, hairy ghosts, picking up hailstones from the pile, dashing them to the egg of the cloud, hurling them hailstones at the peach, dashing back to get more. And then, with the pile of stones was all gone, they simply grabbed handful of cloud and made as many more as they wanted, and much bigger ones, some of them as large as cannonballs. "Quickly," cried James, "down the tunnel, or we all be whipped out." There was a rush for the tunnel entrance, and half a minute later, everybody was safely downstairs inside the stone of the peach, trembling with fright and listening to the noise of the hailstone as they came crashing against the side of the peach. "I'm a wreck," groaned the centipede. "I'm wounded all over." "It serves you right," said the earthworm. "Would somebody kindly look and see if my shawl is cracked?" the ladybird said. "Give up some light," shouted the grasshopper. "I can't," wailed the glowworm. "They've broken my bulb." "Then put in another one," the centipede said. "Be quiet a minute," said James. "Listen, I do believe they're not hitting us anymore." They all stopped talking and listened. Yes, the noises had ceased. The hailstones were no longer smashing against the peach. "We left them behind. The sea must have pulled us away out of danger. Hooray! Let's go out and see." Cautiously, with James going first, they all climbed back up the tunnel. James poked his head out and looked around. It was all clear. "I can't see them anywhere." 28. One by one, the travelers came out again on the top of the peach and gazed carefully around. The moon was still shining as bright as ever, and there were still plenty of huge shimmering cloud mountains on all sides. But there were no cloudmen in sight now. "The peach is leaking," shouted the grasshopper, peering over the side. "It's full of holes, and the juice is dripping out everywhere." "That does it," cried the earthworm. "If the peach is leaking, then we shall surely sink." "Don't be an ass," the centipede told him. "We are not in the water now." "Oh, look," shouted the ladybird, "over there." Everybody swung around to look. In the distance, directly ahead of them, they now saw a most extraordinary sight. It was a kind of arch, a colossal, shaped thing that reached high up in the sky and came down again at both ends. The ends were resting upon a huge flat cloud that was big as a desert. Now, what in the world is this? It's a bridge. It is an enormous hoop cut in half. Its giant home shows standing upside down. "Stop me if I'm wrong," moaned the centipede, going white in the face. "But might those not be cloudmen climbing all over it?" There was a dreadful silence. The peach floated closer. "They are cloudmen. There are hundreds of them. 1,000. Millions." "I don't want to hear about it," shrieked the poor blind earworm. "I'd rather be on the end of fish hook and use the bait than come up against these terrible creatures again. I'd rather be fried alive and eaten by a Mexican," wailed the old green grasshopper. "Please keep quiet," whispered James. "It's our only hope." They crouched very still on top of the peach, staring at the cloudmen. The whole surface of the cloud was literally swarming with them, and there were hundreds more up above climbing about the mountainous crash. "But what is that?" whispered the ladybird. "And what are they doing?" "I don't care what they are doing," said the centipede, scuttling over the tunnel entrance. "I'm not staying up here. Goodbye." But the rest of them were too frightened or too hypnotized by the whole affair to make a move. "Do you know what?" James whispered. "What?" they said. "That enormous arch, they seem to painting it. They've got posts of paint and big brushes. Look!" And he was quite right. The travelers were close enough now to see that this was exactly what the cloudmen were doing. They all had a huge brush in their hands, and they were splashing the paint on the great curvy edge in frenzy of speed, so fast in fact that in a few minutes the whole of the arch became covered with the most glorious colors: red, blue, green, and purple. "It's a rainbow," everyone said at once. "They are making a rainbow." "Oh, isn't it beautiful? Just look at those colors." "Centipede," they shouted, "you must come up and see this." They were so enthralled by the beauty and brilliance of the rainbow that they forgot to keep their voice low. The centipede poked his head cautiously out of the tunnel entrance. "Well," he said, "I've always wondered how those things were made. But why all the ropes? What are they doing with the ropes?" "God heavens, they are pushing it off at the cloud," cried James. "There it goes. They are lowering it down to earth with ropes." "And I'll tell you something else," the centipede said. "If I'm not greatly mistaken, we ourselves are going to bump right into it." "Bless my soul, he's right," the grasshopper screamed. The rainbow was now dangling in the air below the cloud. The peach was also just below the level of the cloud, and it was heading directly toward the rainbow. "We are lost," Miss Spider cried, wringing her feet again. "The end has come." "It can't stand it," wailed the Earthworm. "Tell me what's happening." "We are going to miss it," shouted the ladybird. "No, we're not." "Yes, we are." "No, yes, no." "Oh my heavens, hold on everybody," James called out, and suddenly there was a tremendous thud as the peach went crashing into the rainbow. This, followed by an awful splintered noise as the enormous rainbow snapped right across the middle and became two separate pieces. The next thing that happened was extremely unfortunate. The ropes that the cloudmen had been using for lowering the rainbow got tangled up with the silk strings that went up from the peach. The peach was trapped. Panic and pandemonium broke out among the travelers, and James, glancing up quickly, saw the faces of the 1,000 cloudmen peering down at him over the edge of the cloud. The faces had almost no shape at all, because of the long white hairs they covered them. There were no noses, no mouths, and no ears. Only the eyes were visible in each face. Two small black eyes glinting malevolently through the hairs. Then came the most frightening thing of all. One cloudman, a huge hairy creature who must have been 14 feet tall at least, suddenly stood up and made a tremendous leap off the side of the cloud, trying to get on of the silk strings above the peach. James and his friends saw him go flying through the air above them, his arms outstretched in front of him, reaching for the nearest string. And they saw him grab it and cling to the white hands and legs. And then, very, very slowly, hand over hand, he began to come down the string. "Merci, help, save us," cried the ladybird. "He's coming down to eat us." "Jump overboard." "Then eat the earthworm first," shouted the centipede. "It's no good eating me. I'm full of bones like a kipper." "Centipede," yelled James, "quickly, bite through that string, the ones he's coming down on." The centipede rushed over the stem of the peach and took the silk string in his teeth and bit through. Immediately, far above them, a single bird was seen to come away from the rest of the flock and go flying off with a long string trailing from its neck, and clinging desperately to the end of the string, shouting and cursing with fury was the huge hairy cloudman. Up and up he went, swinging across the moonlight sky, and James, watching him with delight, said, "My goodness, he must weigh almost nothing at all for one bird to be able to pull him up like that. He must be all hair and air." The rest of the cloudmen were so flabbergasted at seeing one of their company carried away in this manner that they let go the ropes they were holding. And then, of course, down went the rainbow, both halves of it together tumbling toward the earth. This freed the peach, which at once began sailing away from the terrible cloud. But the travelers were not in the clear yet. The influid cloudmen jumped up and ran after them along the cloud, peddling them with all sorts of hard and horrible objects. Empty paint buckets, paint brushes, rotten eggs, dead rats, bottles of hair oil, anything those brutals could lay their hands on came rainbow down on the peach. One cloudman, taking very careful aim, tipped a gallon of thick purple paint over the edge of the cloud right on the centipede himself. The centipede screamed with anger. "My legs," he cried. "They're all sticking together. I can't walk, and my eyelids won't open. I can't see, and my boots." But for the moment everyone was far too busy doing the things the cloudmen were throwing to pay any attention to the centipede. "The paint is drying," he moaned. "It's going hard. I can't move my legs, and I can't move anything." "You can still move your mouth," the earthworm said, "and that is great pity." James bawled the centipede. "Please help me. Wash off this paint. Scrape it off. Anything." 29. It seemed like a long time before the birds were able to pull the peach away from the horrible rainbow cloud. But they managed it at least, and then everybody gathered around the wretched centipede and began arguing about the best way to get the paint off this body. He really did like the sight. He was purple all over. And now that the paint was beginning to dry and harden, he was forced to visit very stiff and upright, as though he were encased in cement, and all 42 of his legs were sticking out straight in front of him like rods. He tried to say something, but his lips wouldn't move. All he could do now was to make gurgling noises in his throat. The grasshopper reached out and touched him carefully on the stomach. "But how could it possibly have dried so quickly?" he asked. "It's rainbow paint," James answered. "Rainbow paint dries very quick and very hard." "It detests paint," Miss Spider announced. "It frightens me. It reminds me of Aunt Spiker. The late Aunt Spiker. I mean, because the last time she painted her kitchen ceiling, my poor darling grandmother stepped into it by mistake when it was still wet, and there she stuck. And all through the night we could hear her calling to say, 'Help!' And it was heartbreaking to listen to her. But what could we do? Not a thing, until the next day when the paint had dried, and then, of course, we all rushed over to her and calmed her down and gave her some food. Believe it or not, she lived for 6 months like that, upside down on the ceiling with her legs stuck permanently in the paint. She really did. We fed her every day. We bought her fresh flies straight from the web. But then on the 26th of April, Aunt Sponge, the late Aunt Sponge, happened to glance up the ceiling, and she spotted her. "A spider," she cried. "A disgusting spider. Quick, fetch my mop with the long handle." And then, oh, it was so awful I can't even talk about it. Miss Spider whipped away a tear and looked sadly at the centipede. "You poor thing," she mourned. "I do feel sorry for you." "It never come off," the earthworm said brightly. "Our centipede will never move again. He will turn into a state, and we shall be able to put him in the middle of the lawn with a bird bath on the top of his head. We could try peeling him like a banana," the old grasshopper said. "Or rubbing him with sandpaper," the ladybird said. "Now, if he stuck out his tongue," the earthworm said, smiling a little, The first time in his life, if he stuck it out really far, then we could all catch hold of it and start pulling. And if we pulled hard enough, we could turn him inside out and he would have a new skin. There was a pause while the others considered this interesting proposal. I think, James said slowly, I think that is the best thing to do. Then he stopped. What was that? He asked quickly. I hear a voice. I heard something shouting. 30. They all raised their heads, listening. Shh! There is it again. But the voice was too far away to hear what it was saying. It's a cloud man, Miss Spider cried. I just know it's a cloud man. They are after us. It came from above, the Earthworm said, and automatically everybody looked upward. Everybody except the Centipede who wouldn't move. Ouch, said it. Help, mercy, we're going to catch it this time. For what they know, so swirling and twisting directly over their heads was an immense black cloud, a terrible, dangerous, thunder-looking thing that began to rumble and roar even as they were staring at it. And then from the high up and the top of the cloud, the faraway voice came down, very loud and clear. One with the faucets, he shouted. One with the faucets. One with the faucets. 3 seconds later, the hole underneath of the cloud seemed to split and burst open like a paper bag, and then out came the water. They saw it coming. It was quite easy to see because it wasn't just raindrops. It wasn't raindrops at all. It was a great solid mass of water that might have been a lake or a whole ocean dripping out of the sky on top of them. And down it came, down and down and down, crashing first on the top bird and then on the peach itself, while the poor travelers shrieked with fear and grouped around frantically for something to catch hold of. The peach stem, the silk strings, anything they could find, and all the time the water came pouring and roaring down upon them, bouncing and smashing and sloshing and slashing and swashing and swirling and surging and whirling and gurgling and gushing and crushing and rushing. And it was like being pinned down underneath the biggest waterfall in the world and not being able to get out. They couldn't speak. They couldn't see. They couldn't breathe. And James Henry Trotter, holding madly the one of the silk strings above the peach, told himself that this must surely be the end of everything at last. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the deluge stopped. They were out of it and it was all over. The wonderful birds had flown right through it and came out of the safely on their side. Once again, the giant peach was sailing peacefully through the mysterious moonlight sky. I'm drowning, gasped the grasshopper. It's gone right through my skin, the earthworm groaned. I always thought my skin was waterproof, but it isn't. Look at me, shouted the centipede, excited. It was washed me clean. The pain's all gone. I can move again. That's the worst news I had in a long time, the earthworm said. The centipede was dancing around the deck and turning somersaults in the air and singing at the top of his voice. Oh, hooray for the storm and the rain. I can move. I don't feel any pain. And now I am pest. I am the biggest and best, the most marvelous pest once again. Oh, do shut up, the grasshopper said. Look at me, cried the centipede. Look at me. I am freed. I'm freed. Not the scratch, not a bruise, not a bleed. To his grave this fine gent. They all through they had sent. And I very near went. Oh, I very near went. But they sent quite the wrong centipede. 31. How fast we are going all of the sudden, the ladybird said. I wonder why. I don't think that the birds like this place any better than we do, James answered. I imagine They went to get out as soon as they can. They got a bad frighten on the storm we just been through. Faster and faster flew the birds skimming across the sky at a tremendous pace, with the peach trailing out behind them. Cloud after cloud went by one either side, all of them ghostly white in the moonlight, and several more times during the night the travelers caught glimpses of cloudmen moving around on the tops of these clouds, working their sinister magic upon the world below. Once they passed a snow machine in operation, with the cloudmen turning the handle and blizzard of snowflakes blowing out of the great funnel above. They saw the huge drums that were used for making thunder, and the cloudmen beating them furious with long hammers. They saw the frost and factories and the wind produced and the places where cyclones and tornadoes were manufactured and sent spinning down toward the earth. And once, deep in the hollow of the large pillow cloud, they spotted something that could only have been a cloudman's sight. There were caves everywhere, running into the cloud, and in the entrance of the caves cloudmen's wives were crouching over little stoves with frying pans in their hands, frying snowballs for their husbands' suppers. And hundreds of cloudmen's children were frisking about all over the place and shrieking with laughter and sliding down billows of the clouds. An hour later, just before dawn, the travelers heard a soft swooshing noise above their heads, and they glanced up and saw an immense great bakal creature swooping down towards them out of the dark. It circled round and round the peach, flapping its great wings slowly in the moonlight and staring at the travelers. Then it uttered a series of long, deep, melancholy cries and flew off again into the night. "Oh, I do wish the morning would come," Miss Spider said. "It won't be long now," James answered. "Look at this getting lighter over it already." They all sat in silence, watching the sun that came up slowly over the rim of the horizon for a new day. 32. And when the full daylight came at least, they all got to their feet and stretched their poor cramped bodies. And then the centipede, who always seemed to see things first, shouted, "Look, there's land below." "He's right," they cried, running to the edge of the peach. "Hooray! It looks like streets and houses. But how enormous it all is." A vast city, glistening in the early morning sunshine, lay spread over their 1,000 feet below them. At the height, the cars were like little battleground along the streets, and people walking on the pavements looking no larger than tiny grains of soot. "But what tremendous tall building!" exclaimed the ladybird. "I've never seen anything like them before in England." "Which town do you think it is?" "This couldn't possibly be England," said the grasshopper. "There, where is it?" asked Miss Spider. "You know what those buildings are," shouted James, jumping up and down with excitement. "Those are skyscrapers. So this must be America, and that my friends mean that we have crossed the Atlantic Ocean overnight." "You don't mean it," they cried. "It's not possible. It's incredible." "Oh, I always dreamed of going to America," cried the centipede. "I had a friend once who—" "Be quiet," said the Earthworm. "Who cares about your friend? The thing we got to think about now is how on earth we going to get down." "Ask James," said the ladybird. "I don't think that should be very difficult," James told them. "All we have to do is to cut loose a few birds. Not many, mind you, but just enough so that the others quite keep us in the air. Then down we shall go, slowly and gently, until we reach the ground." 33. Far below them, in the city of New York, something like Panambus was breaking out. A great round ball as big as a house had been sight hovering up the sky over the center of Manhattan, and the cry had gone up that it was enormous bomb sent over another country to blow the whole city. Air raid sirens began wailing in every section. All radio and television programs were interrupted with announcement that the population must go down into their cellar immediately. 1 million people walking in the streets on their way to work looked up in the sky and saw the monster hovering above them and started running for their nearest subway entrance to take over. Generals grabbed hold of telephones and shouted orders to everyone they couldn't think of. The mayor of New York called up the president of the United States down in Washington to ask him for help, and the president, who at that moment was having breakfast in his pajama, quickly pushed away in his half-finished plate of sugar crisps and started pressing buttons right and left to summon his admirals and generals. And all the way across the vast stretch of America, in all the 50 states from Alaska to Florida, from Pennsylvania to Hawaii, the alarm was sounded and the word went out that the biggest bomb in history of the world was hovering over New York City. 34. Come on, Centipede, bite through the first string, James ordered. The centipede took one of the silk strings between his teeth and bite through. And once again, a single bird came away from the rest of the flock and went flying off in its own. Bite another. The centipede bite another string. Why aren't we sinking? We are sinking. No, we're not. Don't forget the peach is a lot lighter now than we started out, James told them. It lost an awful lot of juice when all those hailstones hit the night. Cut away 2 more, Centipede. Ah, that's better. Here we go. Now we really sink. Yes, this is perfect. Don't bite any more, Centipede, or we sink too fast. Gently does it. Slowly the great peach began losing high and the buildings and streets down below began coming closer and closer. Do you think we all got our pictures in the papers when we get down? My goodness, I've forgotten to polish my boots, the centipede said. Everyone must help me to polish my boots before we arrive. Oh, for heaven's sakes, the earthworm said. Can't you even stop think about? But he never finished his sentence. For suddenly, whoosh! And they looked up and saw a huge 4-engaged plane coming shooting out of a nearby cloud and go whizzing past them, not more than 20 feet over their heads. This was actually the regular early morning passenger plane coming into New York from Chicago, and as it went by, it sliced right through every single one of the silken strings, and immediately the birds broke away, and the enormous peach, having nothing to hold it on air no longer, it went tumbling down toward the earth like a lump of lead. Help, cried the centipede. Save us, cried Miss Spider. We are lost, cried the ladybird. This is the end, the grasshopper gasped. James, cried the earthworm. Do something. I can't, cried James. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Shut your eyes. I won't be long now. 35. Round and upside down went the peach as it plumped towards the earth, and they were all clinging desperately to the seam to save themselves from being flung into space. Faster and faster it fell, down and down and down, racing closer and closer to the house and streets below, where it would surely smash into a million pieces when it hit. And all the way along Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue, people who had not yet reached the underground shelters looked up and saw it coming. And they stopped running and stopped staring in a sort of stupor at what they thought was bigger bomb and all the world falling out of the sky on their heads. A few women screamed, others knelt down on the sidewalks and began to pray. Strong men turned to another and said things like, "I get this is it, Joe, and goodbye, everybody." And for the next 30 seconds, the whole city held his breath, waiting for the end to come. 36. "Goodbye, Lady Bird," gasped James, clinging to the stem of the fallen peach. "Goodbye, Centipede. Goodbye, everybody." There were only a few seconds to go now, and it looked as though they were going to fall right in among all the tallest buildings. James could see the skyscrapers rushing up to meet them at the most awful speed, and most of them had squared the flat tops. But the very tallest of them all had a top that tapered off into a long, sharp point, like an enormous silver needle sticking up in the sky, and it was precisely on the top of the needle that the peach fell. There was the squelch, the needle went in deep, and suddenly there was this giant peach caught on a spike upon the pinnacle of the Empire State Building. 37. It was really an amazing sight, and in 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the people below realized that this now couldn't be possibly a bomb, they came pouring out of the shelters and the subways to gape at the marvel. The streets for half a mile around the building were jammed with the men and women, and when the word spread that there was actual living things moving about on top of the great round ball, then everyone went wild with excitement. "It's a flying saucer," they shouted. "They are from outer space. They are men from Mars. Or maybe they came from the moon." And a man who had a pair of binoculars to his eyes said, "They look pretty peculiar to me, I tell you that." Police cars and fire engines came screaming in from of all the city and pulled up outside the Empire State Building. 200 firemen and 600 policemen swarmed into the building and were up in the elevators as high as they could go. Then they poured out on the observation roof, which is a place where the tourists stand, just at the bottom of the bike spike. All the policemen were holding their guns at the ready with their fingers on the trigger, and the firemen were clutching their hatchets. But from where they stood almost directly underneath the peach, they couldn't actually see the travelers up on top. "Ahoy there," shouted the chief of police. "Come out and show yourself." Suddenly, the great brown head of the centipede appeared over the side of the peach, his black eyes as large as a round true marvelous glared down on the police and the firemen below. Then his mysterious ugly face broke into white grin. The policemen and the firemen all started shouting. "Look out," they cried, "it's a dragon." "It's not a dragon, it's a wampus." 3 firemen and 5 policemen fainted and had to be carried away. "It's a snoozwinger. It's a wangdoodle." The centipede kept on grinding. He seemed to be enjoying enormous the commotion that was causing. "Now, see here," shouted the chief of police, cupping his hands to his mouth. "You listen to me. I want you to tell me exactly where you come from." "We come from thousands of miles away," the centipede shouted back, grinning more broadly than ever and showing his brown teeth. "There you are," called the chief of police. "I told you they came from Mars." "I guess you are right," said the head of the fire department. At this point, the grasshopper poked his huge green head over the side of the peach, along the side of the centipedes. 6 more big strong men fainted when they saw him. "That's one onyx," screamed the head of the fire department. "Or a cockatrice," yelled the chief of police. "Stand back, men. It may jump down on us any moment." "What on earth they are talking about?" the grasshopper said to the centipede. "Search me," the centipede answered. "But they seem to be in an awful stew about something." Then Miss Spider, large, black, murderous-looking head, which to a strange was probably the most terrifying of all, appeared next to the grasshopper. "Snakes and ladders," yelled the head of the fire department. "We are finished now. It's a giant scorpula." "It's worse than that," cried the chief of police. "It's a venomous kind. Oh, just look at this vermicious groom's face." "Is that the kind that eats full-grown men for breakfast?" "I'm afraid it is," the chief of police answered. "Oh, please, why doesn't someone help us to go down from here?" Miss Spider called out. "It's making me giddy." "This could be a trick," said the head of fire department. "Don't anyone make a move until I say." "They've probably got space guns," muttered the chief of police. "But we got to do something," the head of the fire department announced. "About 5 million people are standing down there in the streets watching us." "Then why don't you put up your ladder?" the chief of police asked. "I will stand at the bottom and hold it steady for you, while you go up and see what's happening." "Thanks very much," snapped the head of the fire department. Soon there were no less than 7 large fantastic faces peering down over the side of the peach. The centipedes, the grasshoppers, the spiders, the earthworms, the ladybirds, the silkworms, and the glowworms. And a sort of panic was breaking among of the firemen and the policemen. Then, all at once, the panic stopped and a great gasp of astonishment went up. For now a small boy was seen standing up there beside the other creatures. His hair was blowing in the wind, and he was laughing and waving and calling out, "Hello, everybody." For a few moments the men below just stood and stared and gaped. The simple couldn't believe their eyes. "Bless my soul," cried the head of the fire department, going red in the face. "It really is a little boy, isn't it?" "Don't be frightened of us, please," James called out. "We are so glad to be here." "What about those others beside you?" shouted the chief of police. "Are any of them dangerous?" "Of course they're not dangerous, James. They are the nicest creatures in the world. Allow me to introduce them to you one by one, and then I'm sure you will believe me. My friend is the centipede, and let me take it now. He is so sweet and gentle that the Queen of Spain again and again has summoned him by phone to babysit and sing and knit and be cheerpon when nurse it off and all the royal children are alone." "The earthworm on the earth hand," said James, "begin to expand. It's great for digging up the land and making old soils never. Moreover, you should understand he would be absolutely grand for digging subway tunnels and for making you a server. And the grasshopper, ladies and gents, it's a boon in a millions and millions of ways. You have only to ask him to give you a tune and he plays and plays and plays. As a toy for children, he's perfectly sweet. There's nothing so good in the shops. You only to tickle the soles of his feet and he hops and hops. And now, without excuse, I like to introduce the charming glowworm, lover of simplicity. She is easily to install on your ceiling and your wall, and also the snakes a bite of eccentricity. It's really rather clever, for thereafter you will never have the slightest need for using electricity. And here we have Miss Spider, with a mile of thread inside her, who has personally requested me to stay that she never meet Miss Muffet on her charming little tuffet. If she had she not have frightened her way. Should her look sometimes alarm you, then I don't think it would harm you. To repeat at least 100 times a day, I must never kill a spider. I must only help and guide her and invite her in the nursery to play. And here's my darling ladybird, so beautiful, so kind. My greatest comfort since this trip began. She has 400 children, and she left them all behind. But they are coming on the next page of the can. And now the silkworm James went on, whose silk will bear comparison with all the greatest silks there are in Rome and Philadelphia. If you would search the whole world through, from Paraguay to Timbuktu, I don't think you would find one bite of silk that could compare with it. Even the shops in Singapore don't have the stuff. And what is more, the silkworm had, I'll have you know, the Hannah not so long ago, to spin a wave and sew and press the Queen of England wedding dress. And she already made and sent a waistcoat for your president. 38. 5 minutes later, they were all safely down, and James was excitedly telling his story of a group flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had come over on the beach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of the city, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steeplejacks armed with ropes and ladders and pulleys swarmed up the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the giant peach off the spike and lowered it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, "We must now have a ticker-tape parade for our wonderful visitors." And so procession was formed, and in the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all his friends. Next came the giant peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto the very large truck, and they had now sat looking just as huge and proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole in the bottom of it where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in, but who cared about that, or indeed about the peach juice that was dripping out of in the street? Behind the speech, skidding about all over the place, came the mayor's limousine, and behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowd went wild with excitement. They lined the streets and they leaned out of the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing out bits of white paper and thick tape. And James and his friends stood up in their car and waved back at them as they went by. Then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was moving slowly along 50th Avenue when suddenly a little girl in red dress ran out from the crowd and shouted, "Oh, James, could I please have just a tiny taste of your marvelous peach?" "Help yourself," James shouted back. "Eat all you want. I won't keep forever." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd and came running on the street. "Can we have some of it too?" they cried. "Of course you can," James answered. "Everyone can have some." The children jumped up on the truck and swarmed like ants all over the giant peach, eating and eating to their heart's content. And as the news of what happened spread quickly from streets to streets, more and more boys and girls came running from all directions to join the feast. Soon there was a trail of children a mile long chasing after the peach as it proceeded slowly up 5th Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamilton has suddenly decided up in New York. And James, who had never dreamed that there could be so many children as these in the world, it was the most marvelous thing that happened ever. 39. And this journey ended, but the travelers lived on. Every one of them became rich and successful in the new country. The Centipede was made vice-president in charge of sales of high-class firm of boot and shoe manufacturers. The Earthworm, with his lovely pink skin, was employed by a company that made woman face cream to speak commercials on television. The Silkworm and Miss Spider, after they had both been taught they make nylon thread instead of silk, set up a factory together and made ropes for tightrope walkers. The Glowworm became the light inside the torch on the Statue of Liberty, and thus saved a grateful city from having to pay a huge electric bill. The Grasshopper became a member of the New York Symphony Orchestra, where his playing was greatly admired. The Ladybird, who had been haunted all her life by the fear that her house was on fire and her children all gone, married the head of the fire department and lived happily ever after. And as for the enormous peach stone, it was set up permanently in a place of honor in the Central Park and became a famous monument. But it was not only a famous monument, it was also a famous house. And inside the famous house there lived a famous person, James Henry Trotter himself. And all you had to do any day of the week was to go and knock upon the door, and the door would always be open to you, and you would always be asked to come inside and see the famous rooms where James and he'd first meet his friends. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the Grasshopper in there as well, resting peaceful in a chair before the fire, or perhaps it would be the Ladybird who had dropped in for a cup of tea and a gossip. Or the Centipede to show off a new batch of particular elegance boots that had just acquired. Every day of the week, hundreds and hundreds of children from far and near came pouring into the city to see the marvelous peach stone in the park. And James Henry Trotter, who once, if you remember, had been the saddest and loneliest little boy that could find, now had all the friends and playmates in the world. And because so many of them were always begging him to tell again the story of his adventures on the peach, he thought he would be nice one day, sat down and wrote a book. So he did. And that is what you have just finished reading. Pooh! That was a very long book. I put it in 3 parts, and I'm happy that you stay until I'm now finished with the last part of it. I just can recommend you, if you not read the first parts already, do so. Click yourself through my playlist and see the first 2 parts and everything else what I have to offer. My name is Katz, and I'm a heavily tattooed girl who shows you the satisfaction of sound. And if you are not sleeping right now or so calmly relaxed that you can't move, feel free to follow, subscribe, click on the notification bell, and comment that we will create together a little new ASMR world here. And I can tell you, without saying many more, this book is one of my new favorite ones. So nice written and lovely. Thank you so much for taking your time and listening to it.